Take a look in my game face. Ain't no stopping me, you know I'm coming in first place. Won't stop it till I get that ring. I'ma dominate all day. No matter who you bring, I will not lose.
Yeah.
I will not lose.
I will not lose. Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 5 of MMA Full Throttle with Aristotle. I'm your host, Aristotle, aka Harry Tags. Please make sure you're subscribed to Black Gritty on YouTube, Spotify, following on Twitter and Instagram as well. I'm Harry Tags on all social media, Aristotle on Xbox. There's some numbers at the end of the gamer tag, so I think it's 4521 or something. But anyway, if you wanna play some games, play some Rocket League, check me out there. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. As I said, on today's episode, which I'm recording on a Monday, I'm going to be recapping the fights from over the weekend. So we had a fight night headlined by Tuivasa versus Tybura at the UFC Apex in Las Vegas. One of those cards that, not a lot of fans, not a lot of buzz. It wasn't a super stacked card by any means. We have UFC 300 coming up pretty soon, some other fight nights happening. So this is definitely one of those cards that was a little bit maybe lackluster if you are more of a casual fan and you're not as familiar with people. But as I broke it down, going into these fights on the previous episode, some of these matchups were definitely interesting for me as someone who's seen a lot of these fighters. But I realized after watching the fights of the weekend, there was also some debuts of some fighters to watch out for, to look forward to fighting more in the future. And so besides recapping the fights from the weekend, I'll also be looking at some headlines, some fight announcements. There's been some recent fight announcements specifically for UFC 301. I know I've been, super hype about UFC 300 as, UFC 300 deserves, as well as the recent pay-per-views like UFC 299, UFC 298, even UFC 297. And 301 has kind of almost been an afterthought because we're trying to get to that big, round number of UFC 300. But 301 is going to be in Brazil. It's a pay-per-view event in Brazil, headlined by some, legends, I would say Brazilian legends, but at the same time, there's a lot of great Brazilian fighters that are fighting on UFC 300. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how UFC 301 is looking in terms of the card and the makeup of everything. A little bit about, as I said, the recap of the fights of the weekend, and then just some other headlines that I've noticed that have been catching my attention. So please stay tuned throughout the week. I'm going to try to do kind of shorter episodes, or at least more frequent episodes. Definitely going to try to keep it under an hour, as I've been mentioning. And maybe here and there do just a fight breakdown, a quick video. So stay tuned for more diversity of content, as I've been talking about. But without further ado, I'm gonna share my screen and talk about let's start out with the fights. I know I kind of get you get into it with the headlines usually, but today I'm gonna recap some of the fights that we saw. So first of all, let me get the page up here, sharing my screen. I broke down a lot of these fights going into this weekend on the previous episode. If you want to check that out and see if I was right about any of the things that ended up happening. This first fight on the prelims, Charalampos Grigoriou versus Chad Anheliger. So I probably am not saying those names perfectly, but I'll get it right. The more I hear their names, the more I see it. You see this fight, Chad won unanimous decision, 29-28, 29-28, 30-27. So one judge gave him every round. Another judge gave a round to Grigoriou. It's one of those things where you look at the stats here. We see 5 minutes and 24 seconds of control versus 1 minute 34 in favor of Charalampos, who ended up losing the fight. So yeah, it was one of those things where the striking, was definitely on the side of Anheliger. He, showed out 85 significant strikes to 21, 144 total strikes to 26. So, total strikes will include kind of they call them like rabbit punches, where you're just kind of throwing your wrist at somebody, or you might not have a lot of room to create power, momentum, and you're just kind of trying to annoy somebody. And sometimes, honestly, those rabbit punches, if you're hitting somebody with, let's say, your fist is balled up, but you have your kind of knuckles with the glove, kind of sitting on your fingers a certain way, or the wrist tape or things like that. You can't really be deceptively trying to slice somebody or cut them open with your gloves, and they're also not super sharp objects. But if you hit somebody at the right angle with your nails and things like that, again, you can't scratch. But I've seen guys just punch at certain angles with certain rabbit punches, where just the nature of that position or that angle that you're hitting somebody with, the nature of the gloves, the nature of knuckles and fingernails, even if they're not sharp, you can kind of get somebody, create some damage, create some bleeding, create some bruising. So not to say that Anheliger was doing a ton of damage and creating a ton of blood or anything like that with those total strikes, but just want to talk about the difference between significant strikes and total strikes. I will also say sometimes significant strikes are just a certain puncher, a certain fighter hitting somebody, with whatever their power level is, and that might not always be the same as another person's, punch or strike. So not all significant strikes are created equally, not all strikes are created equally. But again, for this purpose, just to kind of describe the difference, 144 is way more than 26, total strikes. 85 is way more than 21, but again, 144 to 26, if a guy's landing 144 significant strikes, to 21, that fight in my mind is probably going to be a TKO or something like that. So anyway, I spent a little bit more time I mentioned on this fight, but solid fight to start out the prelims. The fight that I was really excited for was the Thiago Moises fight. So I know I talked about that last week, saying that Thiago Moises, again, in the lightweight division, which is really probably the best division across all promotions in all of MMA, and has been for a long time. As I've mentioned before, it's the Khabib Nurmagomedov, Conor McGregor, Charles Oliveira, Islam Makhachev, Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier. I mean, those are legends that are still fighting. A lot of them, Michael Chandler. But you guys have got guys like Thiago Moises, Dan Hooker. There's a lot of lightweights out there. We have Jalen Turner, Renato Moicano, guys that are fighting on UFC 300, Rafael Fiziev. The list goes on and on and on with guys that are just very legit, very elite at something or a variety of things, whether they're strikers or they are grapplers or they can mix it up. Moises is one of those guys that he's fought a lot of really good fighters in his career. He did end up getting the KO victory here. We see about 15 seconds into round 3. If you look at the stats here, we see 6.5 minutes plus of control time in just over 2 rounds, right? So there's 5 minutes per round. So he's got over a full round of control in a fight that didn't even go the full 3 rounds, plus a TKO victory. We see 2 takedowns, 2 for 2 on those takedowns for Moises. He had a knockdown, which ended up being the final knockdown of the fight. We see the diversity in strikes: 25 landed to the head, 10 to the head, 3 to the body, 12 to the legs, compared to just 4, 5, and 7 for his opponent Mitch Ramirez. So it's one of those things where definitely grappling heavy. Definitely Thiago Moises was implementing that throughout the first couple of rounds, but we see those 12 leg kicks were significant. And when I show these highlights, it's going to make a lot of sense. But as I was saying before, I kind of just started talking about those stats. Thiago Moises is somebody that, in a different era or with a few guys retiring at a certain time, or let's say there weren't quite as many great lightweights or elite lightweights, he'd be, a top 10, top 15 guy, consistently. I'm not sure exactly what his ranking is. He might be in the top 15 still, but, he's really in that top 15 range kind of typically, or maybe top 20. He's been borderline maybe top 10 before as well, but it's one of those things, as I'm saying, if he was in a different weight class, different era, a few less elite guys, he could be a top 5 fighter, definitely a perennial top 10 fighter. I could even see guys of his caliber fighting for belts, other divisions. That's just, again, I want to give props to Thiago Moises. I think he's a really, really good fighter, and he gets put in these positions where he's competitive with the better guys. He doesn't get dog walked. He doesn't get outclassed. Even if he's losing a decision that's a clear decision win for the other guy, Thiago Moises is somebody that knows what to do in grappling situations, knows what to do defensively and offensively in those situations. Can strike with anybody, can mix it up pretty well. So yeah, I just want to give a lot of props to Thiago Moises. When I show these highlights, you'll see, I talked about calf kicks before, leg kicks. It's almost becoming like a cheat code in mixed martial arts. It just feels like you hit someone's calf the right way a few times. You don't have to kick them that many times. Like you see 12 kicks here, which, again, getting hit in the face 12 times, you would think isn't great either. But ultimately guys get hit, 100 times in the head sometimes and are fine. I'm like, fuck, man, I just lost. He's also like, thank God my leg is going to get some relief, man. The pain you can feel in those places, especially even in the upper leg, if you get hit there enough times, that can be, bone bruises, that can be damage that, you're not able to walk for days, if not a week or more sometimes. So it's one of those things, you just can't take many of those, and Thiago Moises showed that in this fight. The next fight here, I was leaning. I think I talked about Corey McKenna more, as I've mentioned. If I know both fighters going into a fight, or if I've seen both fighters fight, more than once or twice, I feel really confident making picks, bets, putting money down or whatever. I'm very happy to do it. I can make picks without betting as well. but definitely, as my friends like to say about, playing rock, paper, scissors for things, sometimes you get addicted to the rush. I'm not, hey, I don't want to make light of gambling or anything like that, but just to say that I feel very confident in picks when I know the fighters. And in this situation, Jorge McKenna, I've seen a couple times. I'm not sure if she came into the UFC undefeated or with one loss, but I believe she's they're trying to build her up. She's a younger fighter. Jacqueline Amorim, is also young. She's, a little bit older, I think, a couple years older than Corey McKenna. But we see it was a quick armbar here, submission, a minute 38 seconds into the first round. Only, 11 total strikes were landed between them. McKenna's the one who had the control. So, arm bars sometimes or oftentimes can be threats from people who are on their backs, grabbing, a person who's on top of them, grabbing their arm in a certain way, kind of pinning their head and their, that arm that you're going and trying to snatch, in between your legs, and then kind of just, grabbing a hold of it and trying to snap that thing. So it's one of those situations where this fight actually also had a little bit of ref interference or borderline ref interference. The ref in this fight was Mike Beltran, who I think is a good ref. Being a ref is hard, man. I was talking about this with my buddy the other day. I mean, not only are there a bunch of rules and things you have to be looking out for, but you have to make quick decisions to avoid any super serious damage. Obviously it's one of those things that I can't really get in. I don't have X-ray vision to see if her ligaments are tearing or things like that, but I've seen much worse. It didn't look like her elbow was really hyperextending very much. It didn't look like she had a lot of room for that. Some people can kind of get away with their elbow hyperextending because of just the nature of their, their biology or whatever. McKenna looked like she was pretty stuck in that, straight arm position. But again, Mike Beltran is a good ref. Being ref's tough. You're trying to make decisions about very, health and safety, right? You're trying to keep the fighters safe from extra damage they don't need, keep their careers lasting longer, keep them, able to feed their families. I mean, if you get injured in a fight and you can't fight for a year, the medical costs, the training, you're just not making money unless you have sponsors or things like that on the side. And these people aren't making millions of dollars, especially at this, lower level of the prelims. So, you really want to make sure that you're making if you see a fighter about to tap or you're anticipating a tap, and it's in that situation where, like, if you don't get in there to stop it and that, Jacqueline keeps that armbar in position for a little bit longer, maybe you as the ref are now at fault because you didn't stop the fight in time and, protect Corey McKenna. So I get it. It really looked like she was about to tap. Sometimes people tap or wait to tap on arm bars until their arm is like really about to break. They might be tapping they might be starting to break or starting to have some tears happening, and that's when you go into tap because you're such a warrior. So it really is like a split second thing where the damage could be much worse. So I give Beltran understanding and empathy or whatever, sympathy for that decision. It wasn't some horrible thing. Obviously, everything's okay. McKenna's okay. Morim got the win. Everything happened the way it should have. And I'd rather that Beltran did what he did, keep the fight going and instead of kind of full stopping it and then it turning into a no contest. I've definitely seen that before where a ref comes in to thinks a fighter taps, the fighter doesn't tap, and then that fight becomes a no contest. And the situation in those cases is that the fighter who has the submission in place, I mean, that person might have been about to tap. They might have been like, what, fuck it, I'm going to wait another 5 seconds. Or they might have said, what, fuck it, I'm going to let them choke me out completely. And so, again, they're probably losing that fight. And you call the fight and then take a win essentially away from the person who had the submission because that person didn't tap. So technically, the fight was going to keep going. Who knows what could have happened, right? That's the sort of plausible deniability that happens in that situation. I've seen that happen before. So I'm really glad Amorim got her win, didn't have, turn into a no contest. I'm glad McKenna's safe. And that, again, it worked out in this way that now we might not be talking about it, for months and months. Whereas if it was a controversial decision or, it happened a little bit differently or, Morim ends up losing or she ends up getting injured after because she let go of the armbar, McKenna starts to win. I mean, there could have been a lot of different scenarios at this. So glad it worked out the way it did. And shout out to Amorim for the win. McKenna, it's one of those things where she's still young. So I've seen the UFC sometimes bring in young prospects, then cut them if they don't have a lot of success, let them go build up, get better in another organization, another smaller promotion, local circuits, things like that, then come back to the UFC. So not necessarily saying that I think McKenna's going to be cut, but maybe one more fight, and if she doesn't win, that would be a cut situation just because, she's not the most Like she's not a household name. She's not like knocking people out, in some crazy way. Sometimes you can stick around if you're an exciting fighter versus being like a dominant winning fighter. So we'll see what happens with that. Moving on to the next fight, this is one that I was excited for last week, and I kind of talked about how I knew Josh Kulibau, and I thought, man, I've seen him, rock people, knock people out. I've seen him come back from adversity. A younger guy, I think he's like 25, but I've seen him fight. And Danny Silva, I believe he was making his debut, which I did not know at the time last week when I was breaking it down, kind of going into the fights. But I was looking at his, numbers, like his significant strikes per minute, average was like 13 something, and I was like, damn, I know about Josh Kulibau. Looking at these stats, Danny Silva, looks like he's coming to bang and coming to knock people out, and looks like he has a lot of success when he does so. Landing that many strikes a minute means you're beating the shit out of people. I mean, that's not typical to have 13 strikes a minute, in the UFC. But now I understand more a little bit that it's probably because he was making his debut. So again, if you're a UFC caliber fighter and you're fighting, he's 9-1, so that means he's had a lot of success outside the UFC. He actually fought in Dana White Contender Series, which is a series that Dana White has where he has prospects come up, fight each other. If they impress him, if they win, they kind of get a contract. But I would say if it's an unimpressive win or if it's, kind of just boring or, lacking, you could try to go for a finish. And if you don't get it, still get a contract. But, sometimes Dana White decides to not give people who win those fights contracts because they didn't impress him enough. Danny Silva, this is not that case. He was, impressive in his Dana White Contender Series appearance, got the UFC call, got the contract, and got the win here. Split decision. I agree with it. I would not have been super upset if Josh Kulibau got the split decision. Basically, the fight starts out. Danny Silva hits Kulibau with a couple good shots that looked like they kind of wobble a little bit Kulibau, or at least stun him. I wouldn't say Kulibau looked like he was out on his feet or about to get knocked out quite. Not quite to that level, but he recovered well. Definitely lost the first round, I thought, Kulibau, because of those kind of shots. But again, throughout that round, he was starting to figure out the distance, bounce around a little bit more. Danny Silva was more of kind of like a walking forward, with a lot of pressure. He's putting Kulibau on the back foot the whole fight, but Kulibau's using that distance. Sometimes Danny Silva was overthrowing shots, probably a little bit to do with the fact that he did hurt Kulibau early, so he thought, hey, I can get this guy out of there. But between the end of the first round, kind of recovering from that forward pressure from Danny Silva, from the grappling of Danny Silva, we see 4 takedowns here, 5.5 minutes of control over a 3-round fight. Which most of that came, I believe, in the third round. But basically, Josh Kulibau recovered well, started figuring out the distance, being tricky with his movement, managing that distance where he's able to kind of react to Danny Silva's forward pressure, hit him a few times, do some damage. Danny Silva then tries to counter, and he's now all of a sudden Kulibau's out of range. So honestly, this was a great fight. Everyone in the commentary was mentioning how great of a fight it was, and that was another point I actually want to make about this card. So sometimes the Apex cards, as I've said, are a little bit more boring or like not as much energy because you don't have this giant arena full of fans that you're listening to the crowd reactions and you're just feeding off of that sort of energy. The Apex cards, because of that, but also because of the fact that these pay-per-views are getting so stacked that these cards have lesser known fighters, sometimes lesser, I would say lesser quality as well. In this case, listen, we're living in an era right now where there's a lot of extremely stacked pay-per-views that are, exceeding expectations even for pay-per-views. I don't think that's sustainable, at least not until the UFC builds up even more and gets even more great fighters over the next, several years. I think eventually we could get to that point where every fight you're seeing on any card is like a really good fight, at least. Again, this is one of those situations where, because they're so stacked, this card has some interesting names. Again, if you're a hardcore kind of fan like me, I knew who Kulibau was. Now I know who Danny Silva is. I knew who McKenna was. Now I know who Amorim is. Thiago Moises, I've been a fan of. Again, all these people I'm kind of mentioning on these prelims that I can get up for, but the average fan might not be able to get up for. And again, these fights are happening every weekend pretty much, at least for, streaks of 11 weeks that, kind of we're going through right now. I forget which week. We're probably about halfway through those 11 weeks. But yeah, the Apex cards, how do you get people to get excited for these things, right? If it's not going to be headlined by legends or champions or former champions, what is a way to kind of interest people? I don't think this was necessarily advertised, and I think the UFC should maybe do a better job or try to start advertising. Who's commentating? I know they'll say like, oh, Joe Rogan's coming back for this pay-per-view, or like so in there, or John, not John Anik, but let's say some announcer, Michael Bisping, or I didn't want to use the names of the people that actually were commentating this weekend, but let's say someone is out they have a cold or they have a visa issue, so they replaced by they'll make those types of announcements about who's broadcasting, but it's not like saying, oh, this is the full team this weekend, and we want to advertise you watching a little bit around them, not just around the fighters, but around who's commentating on the fights and who is analyzing the fights. And the reason I say that, is because we had a bunch of former champions. We had almost all former champions, and if not, not all former champions, but at least all former legends or current legends, I should say. So Michael Bisping, former middleweight champion, who I think has done a great job. He's gotten a lot better. He's always been very charismatic and funny. He's gotten more just knowing what to do. Right, you're kind of not media trained, but trained on how to kind of comment in the right situations, when to say what, the flow of your voice, how fast you're talking, which is something I know I can work on a little bit. But he was on the commentary with Dominic Cruz, who is arguably the greatest bantamweight of all time. He was a long-time champion in bantamweight. Again, these guys are really intelligent about the fight game, and they're charismatic, and they're getting better at just kind of the job that they're in now. So it's really cool to hear them break down fights, see what they're seeing. It helps you become a bigger fan. It's like if there's grappling situations that you're used to, people, anyone can kind of watch people strike and think this is exciting. I know what's happening, punching them in the face, like I understand this, but they help you understand the grappling. They help you understand the scrambles when guys are just seem like they're rolling over each other, what techniques they're trying to do and what they're thinking. And when you understand that, then you understand that the highest level fighters, when they're rolling and scrambling and throwing strikes and mixing it up and going from striking to grappling within seconds, that is how you really understand the level that you're watching, because you say, hey, these guys have A, the muscle memory, B, the intelligence, and C, just the body control and technique, and they put in the work to be able to do all these sorts of things. So it's really great to hear commentary from legends of the game. But then on the desk, as they say, which is basically when they kick it back to the studio for some extra analysis, we had Kamaru Usman, who is arguably the greatest welterweight of all time. George St. Pierre probably still has that title, but Kamaru Usman's definitely number 2. He's right there if he's not number 1, and he's still a current great fighter, and he's fought Khamzat Chimaev, and he's still in the mix at welterweight to maybe get a chance at getting his title back one day. So he was on the desk, and then my guy Paul Felder, he's from Philly, so I'm biased for sure, but I think Paul Felder is the best analyst, best commentator, best broadcaster, maybe overall, but definitely of like the former UFC fighters. He's just very charismatic, very articulate in what he says. He's funny. He breaks down the fights well. He knows when to kick it to the right people. He knows when to kind of ask a question to one of his fellow commentators to help the ball keep rolling. So big fan of Paul Felder, big fan of Kamaru Usman. Big fan of all the other guys as well, Dominic Cruz, Michael Bisping. So that almost was another level for me as a hardcore fan of like, okay, maybe these fights aren't all the best fights, and maybe I'm a little bit let down because of partially just the dopamine or serotonin that I've been getting from these recent pay-per-views and coming week to week and being like, all right, it's a fluctuation now, it's a roller coaster. I got to get my mindset in the right place. This is not going to be UFC 300, but then you get to see these guys talking about it. You're like, okay, I want to know how these guys look at the fight, how they break things down. I want to be educated on this. But it's also nice to see their faces, man. I mean, you don't want the legends of the game just to disappear all the time. I think in other sports, there's examples of, ex-athletes doing commentating, doing broadcasting. But there's some guys you just never see again or you forget about, or, and just the nostalgia of childhood or whatever it might be. Sometimes seeing these older players, more so in other sports. The UFC is a younger sport in itself. But it's cool to see. You want to see that they're doing well. You want to see that they're still active in the community, and you want to gain that knowledge that they have. So anyway, I know I kind of just interrupted my breakdown of this fight to talk about that. But again, Danny Silva, Josh Tuivasa, it was a war. They were both kind of figuring things out. These guys are young, up and coming fighters in featherweight division. They're not ranked yet, but I think they're borderline. They're headed for rankings, both of them. They're both young. Silva, I think, is only 27. Tuivasa 25, as I mentioned. But yeah, Silva mixed it up well. He admitted after the fight, he was like, yeah, I was getting a little frustrated, trying to figure out the distance. I thought I had him out of there in the first round, but he didn't seem frustrated. Maybe the fight aesthetic seemed like he was getting frustrated at times, but it didn't seem like mentally he was getting frustrated during the fights. He was just trying to figure it out, right? Sometimes you have the upper hand. Sometimes a guy makes an adjustment. Now he has the upper hand. That's kind of how it was going. Second round, Tuivasa was getting off a little bit, keeping the distance, not getting taken down so much, striking better, and it really just did look like he was turning the tides in that fight and maybe can get the win. Third round, ultra competitive. Silva kind of figured out, he's like, you know what? I'm walking through these. I'm getting hit anyway. Silva was getting damage for sure, but he wasn't looking, like he was wilting at all. And he just, figured out, I got to get my hands on this guy. I got to get him to the ground. Definitely a little bit of a bigger body, stronger body than Kulibao. Used that for the control. And, he was striking as well. Obviously, you see here, if you're looking at the stats, the significant strikes, he had about, 42 less on about half the half the attempted strikes as well as Kulibao. But hey, hitting the guy 45 times ain't bad, and controlling him for a round of the fight ain't bad either. So if you lose a round, strike well in other rounds, grapple a little bit. Again, watching it live, I did think Silva edged the decision over Kulibao with that grappling in the third round. So not mad about it, but I'm really excited to see both guys fight. They both seem like great guys too. Bisping interviewed Silva after the fight and kind of mentioned that on the Contender Series that I was talking about earlier, Silva did not get the finish, and he was a little bit disappointed in himself after that fight, saying that, I wish I got that finish. That's what I was going for. He was a little bit down on his performance. This fight, it seemed like, again, his disposition when he was getting interviewed was a little bit like, again, he seems like a calm guy, and it wasn't like he's depressed or anything, but he just seemed like calmly like, you know what, that was tough, a tough fight, had to figure things out. I'm sure he was feeling some relief, but also feeling some frustration still right at that post-fight interview. But Bisping said to him, hey, just so you know, everyone in here thought that was a great fight. All the commentators, again, hearing that from Bisping, Danny Silva's talking to a legend. He's talking to a former champion on the desk, another former champion in the studio. Two former great fighters. Paul Felder was not a champion, but he was a top 5 lightweight. Again, the best division in the history of the UFC, basically. Paul Felder was in top 5. Could have probably was 1 or 2 fights away at different times of getting a title shot. So really high level guys telling you, hey, you have nothing to be disappointed about. You did a great job. And that kind of changed Silva's disposition a little bit. He kind of perked up, and he was like, you know what, let me look around the couple hundred or 100 or whatever, however many fans there are at the Apex, and definitely not, thousands. He's like, was that a good show for you guys? There was definitely a little bit of a buzz. I don't want to call it a roar necessarily, a little bit of a meow or whatever from the amount of people that were there. But they gave him his love, and he felt that. And then he was like, you know what, never mind. I'm happy with the performance. And I love that. You know what I mean? Just look at it that way. You did a great job overcoming a difficult opponent who is game, who is tough, who is taking your best shots and saying, you know what, I'm going to make an adjustment and I'm going to fuck you up anyway. That's what Silva was dealing with in Kulibao. So got to give a lot of props to that win. Sometimes it's better to do something like that, overcome somebody that is also a great fighter or like on your same level with your own strategy, with your own toughness and heart, instead of just getting a clean knockout, which sometimes can be, called a fluke. But you want to test yourself, and I think this was a great test for Silva, and I'm excited to see who he fights next. So we got here Jafel Filo versus Ode Osborne. I kind of talked about it. We'll show the highlights here. Ode Osborne, I've seen him make some mistakes at times where he just maybe throws a strike that leaves him open to getting hit with a counter shot in a way that, finishes the fight and takes him out. He's definitely skilled, definitely has a variety of skills as well with the striking and the grappling. Well, you see, you just turn like that, have your arms on the ground, and guy's like sitting right there. I mean, he just sees that opening. Your chin's not tucked, nothing. Just seemed like a poor technique, and just I'm not saying Ode Osborne was definitely not quitting or anything like that. I'm not saying that at all. But just, man, you gotta be smarter, protect yourself a little bit better, recognize, you know what, I'm in a bad position here at the end of this round. But if I don't get finished, I'll start on the feet in the next round. So just mistakes there by Ode, and good win by Jafel Filo. Now this fight here, Josiane Nunez versus Chelsea Chandler. I was talking about last episode. Nunez looks like a brawler, right? She's got the buzz cut, got the tats, got the muscly body, muscly build. That is how she fights. Also, she's coming forward, throwing big overhands, knocking people out, big strikes. We see here, looking at the stats, Chelsea Chandler did get the win, unanimous decision, 29-28 across the board on all 3 judges' scorecards. And she had 7 minutes of control, right? 7 minutes of control, landed double the total strikes, only 11 more significant strikes. But, basically the way the fight went, Nunez is only 5'2". Chelsea Chandler is 5'7". That's a big height difference. It's something that you might see at the higher weight classes, in the men's divisions or things like that, but it's rare that you see this level of a height difference in lower weight classes or in the women's weight classes and the women's divisions. So at 135 pounds, 5'2", and again, she's built. Josiane Nunez is not some chubby girl or some fat woman or anything like that. I think she probably would have more success, if she goes down a weight class to 125, if she can lose a little bit of weight. maybe compromise, a little bit of muscle, but at the end of the day, being at this level and having such a big disadvantage in the height and the range, and it's not just your height, right? It's your arm reach, it's your leg reach. Chelsea Chandler can, in theory, keep Nunes away from her. Basically, the reason that this was a split decision was because Nunes was landing some bombs. It was exciting. I was reacting like, oh shit, like oh my god, Nunes is just throwing these overhands that Chandler is kind of just sitting with her chin up and getting rocked. At times, Chandler was even like kind of running backwards to get away from her. Which is, you can do that technically in a fight quickly if you're just trying to get out of a situation, but it looks horrible. It looks bad. Bad footwork, if anything, but if not just, you're afraid or trying to run away. And Chandler eventually could get her grappling, implement the grappling with the 7 minutes in control as we see. Only 2 takedowns, but, with that size advantage and the limbs, right? The arms and the legs are wrapping around Nunes. Kind of just a lot of surface area to kind of be on top of Nunes and keep her on the ground. Nunes never looked really in super big danger or anything, or like she was really hurt, or she's a really game fighter. At the end of the fight, they both reacted to Chelsea being announced, like thinking that their each of their names was being announced. Nunes just was like screaming like yes, like I won, and Chelsea Chandler freaked out too. Sometimes these fighters don't speak English or hear the announcements as well, or sometimes they're just manifesting like themselves winning. They're visualizing their name being called, and they're just like so committed, and they know whether it's God or the universe or just whatever, visualization, mindfulness. They're just sitting there like kind of living in that future of their victory, and then they don't win and they react. I've seen it before, so it's not a big deal. But it was a competitive fight. Chandler, again, that distance management when someone's 5'2", you got to give props to Nunes, but you also got to say, Chandler, you got these legs, use some teep kicks, use some jabs, keep this girl at range. I mean, don't let her get so close to you and just throw bombs. Again, Chandler might not be the best striker, but that's just unimpressive to me. I was more impressed with Nunes. Again, I think that Nunes has to figure out ways to not get taken down and get back up. I think grappling is not necessarily her strong suit, and with the size advantage, it's going to be tough against girls like Chelsea Chandler. But yeah, I'm more excited to see Nunes fight again than Chandler. I feel like Chandler has some deficiencies that against girls that are or women that are closer in size to her. At that weight will be difficult for her to overcome. But at the same time, sometimes it's just matchups and styles make fights. So not super clear yet. But yeah, excited to see Nunes again. I think she should drop in weight, fight at 115, fight at 135, 125. 5'2", the champion at 115 is like 5'4" or 5'5", right? And she's short for that division, Zhang Weili. So Nunes is going to be short for every weight class. Might as well, not fight the the heaviest girls you could fight or heaviest women you could fight. 145 is a division sort of in the UFC. There's like a few women that fight at that weight class. So really, this is the heaviest consistent weight class that the women fight at. I think dropping in weight will help her a lot. Final fight on the prelims here. We got Mike Davis versus Natan Levy. Talked about this fight last week as well. Natan Levy, definitely a impressive and violent and powerful kickboxer, but it's one of those things, if you don't mix it up super well, or if you have, I think he's lacking in the intermediate areas. What I mean by that is, he throws a hard body kick over at Mike Davis. I've seen it hit Mike Davis really hard. You heard a thwap, a really hard sound. Mike Davis wore it well. But then Natan throws another one. Mike Davis kind of times it, throws a jab or a backhand. I forget exactly what punch it was, but throws a punch, timing the body kick. Levy's so off balance with how hard he's throwing the kick that he falls to the ground. Early in the fight, he did get knocked down legitimately, and it looked like the fight might be over. Mike Davis' striking is very crisp and strong, but ultimately you see here he got an arm triangle in the second round because once he had him on the ground with that knockdown, and he didn't necessarily get the finish right away. 5 minutes and 11 seconds of control in a fight that went, looks like it went about 7 minutes, not even. And a knockdown. I mean, he was balling. Mike Davis really was winning that fight, outclassing Natan Levy. I think Levy, again, is impressive in some of the ways he strikes. But when you're lacking those intermediate things and you're fighting a guy that can mix it up like Mike Davis, there's nothing you can really do about it. So if you can't throw a strike, if you're not a great wrestler, right, or a great grappler, and you want to strike all the time, you should at least make sure that your takedown defense is great and that your balance is great and you can avoid being in those positions that you don't want to be in. But right in this situation here, Mike Davis is one of those things. He could have done whatever he wanted. I mean, I've talked about Umar Nurmagomedov before, broken down his fights in recent episodes, and he's even said he could strike with anybody, but if you have like a 2% advantage in striking against somebody, or even a 10% advantage in striking against somebody, but you have a 50 or 60 or 70% advantage in grappling, why not just grapple the guy? So I think in this case, Mike Davis could have done whatever he wanted for the most part and won the fight, but clearly the grappling just made it end as soon as possible. If that knockout didn't happen, he's like, you know what, I'm going down here, I'm gonna choke you out. So lots of props to Mike Davis. Again, lightweight division, Mike Davis is somebody that has a chance to make a run, has a chance to get into the rankings eventually, I think. But I don't know. I don't know if he can be like in the top 5 guys. But I think his skill set, his well-rounded nature, he's got a great mindset as well. He's got potential to get up there. But we'll have to see him fight some of these guys soon. I think he had some injuries over the last few years, so we haven't seen Mike Davis fight a ton. But I'd love to see him get a ranked opponent. Hey, maybe Thiago Moises could be a good fight to see if either of these guys can break their way back into the top 15 or top 10. So great fight by Mike Davis. Very excited to see him go again. Last week I was saying my locks, more or less. If I had to pick locks last week, I was kind of saying, hey, Gerald Meerschaert by submission is pretty good bet most of the time. And he got another one here, rear naked choke. I'll show the highlights as well. Brian Bam Bam Barberena. They're fighting at middleweight. Brian's a little bit undersized for middleweight. He's also fought at welterweight before. But as you get older, sometimes you just don't want to cut the weight anymore. It's harder to cut the weight. Maybe it depletes you, more. You lose your power. You just think, you know what? Maybe I will be at a strength and size disadvantage here. But I know that I'll feel good and I'll feel like my best self. I'd rather feel like my best self with that confidence going into the fight. And their grappling is now something they implement. It's similar to what I was saying before about Mike James and Umar Nurmagomedov. If you have a grappling advantage on somebody, take advantage of it. And here, Macy in this situation, I've seen her work on her wrestling. She's not just going out there just to work to implement her biggest strength or the thing that she has the most fun doing, which is striking. She is now mixing it up well, using her size, using her long limbs, again, similar to Corey Sandhagen and his development, implementing more wrestling, winning fights in a variety of ways, recognizing that you get points, you don't really get points, but judges look for, hey, this person is grabbing somebody and holding them. And even though that's not really like dominating or winning a fight, you're in the more dominant position in that situation. So that reminds me of Corey Sandhagen. Great win by Macy. Looking forward to see her fight again. She's had a lot of interesting fights and good fights in her career. I think she's high level. And hey, maybe one day I will say that she's as good as Corey for her division. But Corey's really, really good, so I don't know if I will. But anyway, shout out to Macy. Great win. And looking forward to seeing her fight again. And now we see here, this was a big controversial sort of fight here. Christian Rodriguez versus Isaac Dulgarian. Now watching live, I was really confident Dulgarian won, and that's even with Christian Rodriguez getting a 10-8 round in the 3rd round, because Dulgarian had a 10-8 round in the 1st round. So I thought Dulgarian won the first 2 rounds, got 10-8 in the 1st round, thought he got 10-8'd in the 3rd round, but that negates the 1st round, and then you get that one, that middle round that I thought Dulgarian won. Look at the control time, 9 minutes and 22 seconds of control for Dulgarian. So that's almost 2 rounds of control, right? And that's why that 1st round was such a dominant round, I thought, for Dulgarian. He was landing some strikes. He was constantly doing things, winning positions. And, some people want to argue that damage is more important than positions, and it is. But if somebody is like holding positions or winning positions and you're scrambling and trying to get out of it, so you're not necessarily getting hit, but that person is constantly one step ahead of you, constantly out grappling you, winning the positions over you throughout a round, that person wins the round. And if they're doing that with some strikes and you're not implementing any offense that whole round, basically, and you're just trying to survive the positions, and it looks like you're getting tired because you're getting tossed around or you're trying to do stuff, to me that is 10-8. Like I think the stipulations or the criteria for 10-8 is like dominance, duration, and maybe how much what your opponent does in that round. I forget exactly what all the criteria are, but it's basically like how much damage you're doing to somebody, how much are they doing to you, how much are you just like dominating, controlling the entire round. And Dulgarian did that in the 1st round. I do think that Christian Rodriguez had a maybe more dominant round in the 3rd round. Dulgarian really looked tired. He looks like he was borderline going to get finished several times, or just that he was going to be stuck, as I've said before in this episode, in a position that he can't get out of, whether or not he's like getting knocked out or not. He's just so tired, he just can't get out of it. But he dug deep and he got out of those positions to make sure that he didn't get finished in that last round. Christian Rodriguez looked like a little bit unsure when he was getting interviewed afterwards. People were saying, like, how'd you feel about the decision when you heard it was split? Did you think you won? And he was saying, yeah, I did more damage in the 2nd round, which was ultimately the deciding round here. He landed a knee while he was getting taken down, kind of, and it sounded bad kind of, but Dulgarian didn't like fall down. He didn't let go of him, and it wasn't anything that, I'm sure it knocked some energy out of him. But as much as I do think Rodriguez landed more strikes in the second round than he did in the first round, it was similar to the first round. He was getting out controlled pretty much the whole time. The 3 minutes and 19 seconds of control for Rodriguez was what he was doing in the third round. But Dulgarian, again, almost, besides, I'm sure he had some control time that contributed for the third round as well. So it's not all those first 2 rounds, but the vast majority of the first 2 rounds, you're getting most of your strikes off and all of your control, and you lose that fight. I don't know, man. It's one of those things. I don't want to say it's a robbery necessarily, but I've been thinking about this a lot. Sometimes people look at robberies as, you know what? You could be watching a fight, even if it's close, be like super sure that some fighter won. Then the refs get it wrong. Everyone reacts like, oh my God, what are they watching? You look back at it again and use the benefit of hindsight, rewatch it, try to figure out what the refs were seeing to score it for that person that won that you thought shouldn't have won. And then you justify, you know what? Well, even though I still don't think that person won, I can create some weaker argument for why the decision was what it was, and therefore it's not a robbery, because not every close fight is a robbery. And I understand that argument, and I generally align with it, but holy shit. But holy shit, I don't give a fuck if it's a close fight if you're like, okay, this person seemed like they won these 2 rounds. Like, this was a close fight. It was competitive, 2 10-8 rounds to sandwich the things, alternating guys who did it. So, I mean, clearly a close fight, but pretty much everyone watching this was like, that I saw online, I think the commentators were trying to be, unbiased, and be PC a little bit and not really talk about it too much. But man, Dulgarian, to me, this was borderline a robbery, because watching it live, I was so sure. I was like, wow, like he's getting 10-8 in this last round. But at the same time, he got a 10-8 earlier. So if he doesn't get finished, he should win. Anyway, I'm going on about it. But, I feel bad for Dulgarian. You see he's 6-1 now. He was undefeated. Christian Rodriguez, had a loss, but still, it's just a bummer to see decisions that are just questionable, and like, what are they watching? I don't really get it. So bad decision. I thought Dulgarian should have got that fight. Maybe I'll use that. It's such the semantics of it all. It's like, okay, like, is it a robbery or is it a bad decision? Whatever. I mean, it's a bad decision. I can confidently say it was a bad decision, whether it was a robbery or not. Now here, this is a fight. As much as I was getting cocky a little bit a few minutes ago, talking about Macy, Chiasson, and Gerald Meerschaert getting their wins, Kennedy how do they say Nzechukwu? Oh man, they were fucking up his name on the broadcast too. So I'm kind of like, how is it really? Nzechukwu. I don't know. I'm gonna get that right. Damn, my bad. But yeah, Kennedy and Ovince St. Preux fought. I thought Kennedy was going to get the win, man. But it's one of those things that kind of reminded me watching this fight that Kennedy was on the up and up, getting some finishes against some other prospects and seeming like he was going to maybe go on a little bit of a run. And then he ended up losing, I think, to some of those guys on that same trajectory. Ovince St. Preux, if you look at his recent fights and he's an older guy, he's like 40 years old. Just seems like he's been very slow, very not a lot of action, not a lot of volume. He's kind of reacting to the other guys trying to throw counters. If they're not putting out a lot of volume, then he's putting out even less. Boring, slow fights typically, and he's let guys walk him down to the cage, get close, and hit him with hard shots as well. So I was really leaning towards Kennedy here, and it just didn't work out the way I thought it would. Ovince St. Preux basically did the opposite of what I just said. He looked like a new fighter, not a new fighter, but a resurgence of the old Ovince St. Preux. He was just digging down, biting on his mouthpiece. They both were very similar size, hitting each other with jabs. I mean, it was a competitive fight. I thought Ovince won the first 2 rounds. We see here that Kennedy did win a round. It was a split decision, so he did win 2 rounds actually on one scorecard. I would have been a little bit upset if Kennedy got the decision. Watching live, I really thought Ovince got those first 2 rounds. And then in the third round, he knocked down Kennedy and, he thought it might finish the fight, but Kennedy bounced back, and I thought he won that third round by the end. They were both just like, more so Ovince, but they were both just throwing like labored shots at each other at the end of that third round. Again, it was a good fight. Not the best, most high-level fight of all time, but definitely pretty high-level. I think this was a former title challenger in Ovince St. Preux, former and kind of current, I guess, still prospect in Kennedy Nzechukwu, and I think I got it. I think I said it better that time, but I'll get even better in the future. So Then the weirdest fight, I know that there's been a few weird kind of fights I talked about. Brian Battle, who's a recent The Ultimate Fighter winner off of the recent season, coached by Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler. He was a former middleweight. He won Ultimate Fighter at middleweight. Looks a lot better at welterweight, 6'1". I mean, you see here in these pictures, like they both look kind of shredded, but Angelusa looks just like a beast. When they got in the cages, though, Brian Battle looked like way bigger. Looked way bigger, way bigger. He seemed stronger than Ange. Ange looked shorter than I thought, he was going to look. Couldn't really get the distance, get the range. Couldn't really hit Brian Battle super clean. Battle looked very patient. He was mixing it up with teep kicks, body kicks, switching stances, confident. He's basically the commentary was talking about. He was taking lots of really small, short steps, but constantly doing that to move throughout the fight. So he was closing distance in a good pace, but not too quickly. The choppy steps allowed him to kind of react. If maybe Angelusa then comes at him with an attack, he can quickly go backwards, throw a counter shot. It looked like Brian Battle was just seeing things really well, seeing the punches really well. Looking at the stats here, and this was a round 2 no contest, by the way. It says it here on the screen, but we had a minute 33 of control for Brian Battle, 27 significant strikes, 16 to the head, 10 to the body. Loses most of his strikes. 9 out of the 23 were to the legs, and none of them were really super damaging. Again, just seeing the stats doesn't tell you those are not Thiago Moises leg kicks, right? He wasn't hitting the calf and fucking Brian Battle up. They were just throwing those strikes to try and do something. Battle was checking some of those kicks with his knee or shin, and also just not taking a lot of damage from that. So even though the significant strike totals are a little bit close here, let's just if you get, and I don't want to take away all of Angelusa's stats here, but in theory, if you just say that leg kicks don't really matter in this one round in a minute, this fight went 6 total minutes, minute 33 of control, and essentially, almost double the strikes than if you get rid of the leg kicks. So Brian Battle looked like he was even picking up the pace, picking up the confidence, figuring Angelusa out more. Lusa seemed like he was covering up, blocking shots well. It wasn't look like he was getting super damaged or about to be knocked out necessarily, but I do think it was building, and Brian Battle could have gotten to that point. He was coming forward. He looked like he wanted to get the finish. Looked like he felt super confident in doing so. And then a minute into the second round, accidental thumb eye poke. Brian Battle gets Angelusa with it. Basically, Angelusa goes in for like a fake takedown. Battle reacts to it, tries to grab his head and push him off. Just incidental, accidental. Did not look like it was horrible. I've seen guys get poked in the eye when it's like it looks like it's agony, and you're like, is that guy gonna ever see again? They're crying, they're screaming, you can't see, and you're just in a lot of pain, right? Getting poked in the eye does not feel good when it's bad or at all, right? So it's no problem for Angelusa to take the time. They allow you to get 5 minutes to recover. They'll put a cold pack on it to try and open it up or get the swelling down sometimes. At least that's they were saying that in the fight on Saturday night. I don't remember that being a thing in the past, but still, they're trying to make sure that you have the time to recover, keep fighting. It was an accident. You don't want to end the fight there. And also, if you're really damaged, then they'll end the fight. And if it's early enough in the fight and they don't have enough rounds to score, they'll do what they did here and call it a no contest. Watching live, I did not think Angelusa was going to say that he couldn't fight anymore. Honestly, it might have been an accident also. The doctor came over and he said he couldn't see. If you say that to the doctor, they're going to end the fight. They're going to be like, this guy can't see. We gotta call the fight here at my recommendation. But use the full 5 minutes. Sometimes you get poked in the eye and you can't see for a couple minutes because you're just like so watery or blurry or whatever. Fighter has to be smarter in that situation. After the fight, it was kind of interesting, a little bit weird. I'm gonna actually see if I can look it up real quick. Let's see. Brian Battle. I did not spell his name here. Bryant Battle. That's not who it is. Video. Basically, after the fight happens, Brian Battle and Angelusa just end up like kind of somberly. They're both like none of their hands get raised. There's no contest. The ref's in the middle of them, and then calls him a quitter. Yeah. So I'm gonna get into this a little bit later. It's not showing it. Yeah. I mean, it was kind of funny though. Like basically, Angelusa looks a little bit sad, like turns to towards Brian Battle. So it was very awkward, honestly. It was an awkward moment. Like, are they gonna be like, hey man, it is what it is. Sorry, let's run it back. Sometimes you see that where there's an accident that happens that stops a fight, and the guys are like respectful and they say, you know what? They're both kind of sad that neither guy could get the win, neither guy could get the celebration to elevate their career. or even just the relief of like an actual outcome because they put so much time and energy and effort into these fights and into the training camps. It's really a downer if this happens. But usually you kind of see something like that, or they just both move on and like fuck fuck this guy. I'm gonna go eat some pizza and forget about this. But in this case, Brian Battle turns towards Angel Lusa. Angel Lusa turns towards him. Angel Lusa looks like maybe he's about to be more in that like sorry, run it back sort of vibe. Then Brian Battle is just like, you're a fucking pussy. He's like, you're a fucking pussy, and he's like, I was beating your ass. And Brian Battle is definitely like a anime kind of like goofy kind of dude, and the way he talks sometimes. I feel like I've been saying some repetitive kind of phrasing in this episode, and Brian Battle, he just says, I'm saying, like after every fucking sentence, sometimes when he's kind of on a roll like that. And yeah, anyway, he was just like, you quit, and Ane Lusa reacts like, yo, what the fuck? Like, and honestly, I get it. If someone's kind of coming to you after that situation and just like screaming at you, calling you a pussy, and you are both fighters, but the fight's over, and now all of a sudden, like, it's like if you hit each other, this would be assault. It's a weird kind of context to be in. But Ane Lusa is like, I'll kill you. And like, I don't know how great his English is, but he's literally just like, I'll kill you over and over again in his accent. And he's like kind of trying to go through people and get to Brian Battle. But then Brian Battle said afterwards, which I also thought was a little bit weird and maybe unprofessional, that Bisping ended up like interviewing Brian Battle like right as this is happening. I mean, Ane Lusa is still being held on the other side of the cage, and Battle's still kind of yelling, and Bisping's like, what's going on here? And Brian Battle didn't win the fight. Like, it was a no contest. So it's kind of weird that you would like interview one of the two who's kind of being the aggressor in a no contest situation. But at the same time, we don't have to pretend like Brian Battle wasn't winning and didn't seem like he was going to win. Ane Lusa, again, was not getting like the shit beat out of him, I would say. Like, you look at the strikes here again. It was not like a total just like ass whooping, but Brian Battle was winning. Like, he seemed like he was in control in a way that was leading towards like at the end of the fight, you'd say, yeah, that guy got beat up, and he just he didn't really have a chance during the fight. So I understand Brian Battle's frustration, and then to say, hey, this is what happened 2 minutes ago, 2 seconds ago. You didn't want to fight. You said your eye was, you couldn't see, but now all of a sudden you want to kill me and run across the cage. So honestly, I don't want to assume Angel Lusa was trying to get out of it, trying to quit, trying to say, hey, you know what, I'm losing this fight. If I say I can't see, this will be a no contest. I don't have a loss on my record. We can keep going, and just get another fight or rematch or something. That's definitely possibly what it was going on. But I could see it being him just not recognizing and not being smart enough to not tell the doctor that he couldn't see, and that he was just kind of in a moment reacting to like the energy of Brian Battle after the fight. I don't know if he was still compromised or not, and he's saying, you know what, fuck it, like I'm not risking my record anymore. Now it's just about beating this guy up. So yeah, I don't know for sure. I'm sure we'll find out more over the next week or so. But definitely type of thing where I've seen people commenting on different posts saying Ane Lusa might get cut now from the UFC. If that's what was going on, if he was really like trying to find a way out of the fight and then showing that bravado and toughness afterwards to be like, yeah, I want to fucking kill you now because you're calling me a pussy, but you didn't want to continue the fight before. Dana White doesn't like that. The UFC doesn't like that. So I'm kind of like 50-50 on what's going to happen with him. Some people are saying, oh, they got to run it back and have a rematch now because that's the way to do it. There's more buzz around this fight now. These guys are not like household name fighters. It was the co-main event because Brian Battle was the tough winner and he's starting to get some more attention. But I want to see Brian Battle fight somebody else. Keep moving up the division, see what's good. Give Angel Lusa a shot against someone maybe a little bit worse and see if he is someone worth keeping around the UFC. He seems like an athletic, strong guy, well-rounded. Just the range, and I think the level of Brian Battle is a little bit better. So anyway, the last fight of the night, Tuivasa, Bam Bam Tuivasa versus Marcin Tybura. I said in the breakdown, like, Marcin is really great at canceling out other guys and then just wearing on them and outlasting them and winning. He is more of a grappler, but he can strike. 4 losses in a row now for Tuivasa. So he ended up getting choked out, rear naked choke. It was a little bit weird. We'll see in the video when I show the highlights. It was in the first round. Classic Thai fight. He comes out hot, hits Marcin with some tough shit. Classic Marcin fight. Comes out not hot, gets hit with some tough shit by somebody. That's a brawler. Marcin got cut on the top of the head with an elbow by Ty, but he weathered the storm, and I've seen that happen a million times where it looks like Marcin's like maybe gonna get knocked out, and then he just recovers, and just implements his work. Wears in a guy, just keeps the pace going, uses his cardio. He's got great cardio for the heavyweight division. And we see here 2 minutes and 48 seconds of control within that first round. gets the choke finish with a minute left in the round. And that's just, it's one of those things. Some people are saying, is Ty going to get cut now from the UFC? I'm like, damn, I never would have thought that. It's hard to tell with because he's really not the most fit looking guy. So it's like you wonder sometimes, you question maybe how his training is, or he looked like he was kind of maybe on the verge of getting cut at one point. Why Herb Dean stopped the fight, and there was no controversy. Like no one was like up in arms complaining about it, but he wasn't out. He didn't tap and he wasn't out, so it was like kind of a weird finish. I do think it was like on the verge of going out, and Ty was probably really exhausted. Like having a guy like Marcin Tybura on top of you after you're throwing a bunch of punches and you're brawling, and now he's choking you out and you're trying to get out of it. I mean, I think he was exhausted, so it's possible that Ty just like was so tired and couldn't breathe that he didn't have the opportunity to kind of voice his concern or voice his displeasure with how the fight ended. But he also could have just been like, fuck, I was, maybe he was out. Maybe he was like about to go out and he was kind of blacking out, and all of a sudden the fight ends. He's like, yeah, fuck it, whatever, I was losing. I'm curious to, I watched the post fight afterwards. They talked to Marcin Tybura about it, and they talked about it in general. No one was really like, hey, this is just by letter of the law. This is fucked up. We need to do something about this. No contest. No one's really saying that. Ty is not, as far as I know, not coming out asking for any reviews or kind of the fight to be overturned or anything like that. So it was all fair and square, I think. But it's only Monday, so we'll see if there's any interviews throughout the week, and I'll make sure I address those things as they come. But yeah, anyway, that's my recap of the weekend fight night over there, Apex in Las Vegas. Shout out to Marcin Tybura for that win here. So we're about an hour and 10 minutes into this episode. As I mentioned, I'll talk about some, different, maybe not an hour, 10 minutes. I know I kind of cut out some of the beginning. But, as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about some headlines as well. Just some quick ones to kind of, look at what else is going on in the UFC and kind of maybe give you guys an idea of like what I'm going to be looking at later in the week. I don't know what's going on here with that. Fight announcements we see here. So yeah, the headlines have kind of changed a little bit here. But basically, in the last week or so, we've seen some fight announcements for UFC 301, which I kind of talked about. These are some up and coming things, later this year. Here we go. So this headline here talks about, Diaz Masvidal boxing match, UFC 301 main event, Jose Aldo returning. So yeah, I just want to kind of address that really quickly before I end the episode. As I was kind of talking about earlier, there's different kind of news and fight announcements coming up. Basically, UFC 301, which is going to be in Brazil, is now being seemingly headlined. I don't think they've officially. Oh, actually, no, they did announce UFC 301 is headlined by Alexander Pantoja versus Steve Erceg. Steve Erceg is somebody that I broke down a fight of not too long ago when he was on the same card as Muhammad Mokaev and some other fighters at the flyweight division who are kind of looking for that title challenge spot. We talked about Brandon Moreno in recent episodes where his loss to Brandon Royval kind of took away his opportunity to get that rematch with Alexander Pantoja. And then Mokaev didn't look the best. So it's one of those things. His win recently was against the top 5 opponent, top 6 opponent, Alex Perez. But it just wasn't super impressive. Probably like the type of performance that you think this guy might wilt under the power and the pressure and just the well-roundedness and the relentlessness of Alexander Pantoja. And Steve Erceg, only 3 fights in the UFC. His best win is against a guy ranked in Matt Schnell, but not as highly ranked as Alex Perez. So you would think that based on just the resume, 3 wins versus I think 7 wins maybe for Muhammad Mokaev, that Mokaev probably did deserve the shot over him. But at the same time, Erceg's wins were pretty impressive. He was knocking guys out cold in a division that is not known for that necessarily. And his first couple of fights actually before fighting Matt Schnell were a little bit higher level than some of the fights that Mokaev had when he's building himself up to start his career. So I'm not mad at this in terms of the matchup, because what else are we going to do, kind of? That's the situation we're in. You got to have some Brazilian fighters on the Brazil card. And, there's a lot of Brazilian fighters fighting on UFC 300, so they're not going to be necessarily able to turn it around quickly and go to 301, which is going to be, a week or 2 after that. So I think it's a little bit weird of a decision to have Erceg, but at the same time, it is what it is. I'm curious if any fighters from that UFC 300 card, if they don't take a lot of damage taken if they decide they want to turn around quickly and do fight at 301. I know the headliner, Alexander Poatan Pereira, who is the light heavyweight champion, has said, hey, I've done that in kickboxing before. You know, it might be the next week or 2 weeks after, but if I don't have any damage and the fight goes well, I want to go fight in Brazil too, in his home country. So I'm kind of hoping that happens because right now the card is not very stacked, and usually the Brazil cards are ones you want to have stacked. That being said, a recent Brazil card not too long ago, maybe the one they had last year, there was a legend, Glover Teixeira, who retired and then ended up like, because it was the last fight of the night, I think all the Brazilian fans had left after the co-main event or left during that fight because he was getting beat up pretty bad. And he retired, and there was just like no crowd reaction. They did not pay the respects the way they should have to their Brazilian fighter. So I think some people are kind of like, you know what? We need to punish Brazil for their lack of respect for their own champion, their own great legendary fighter, and not stack the cards as much. I don't know if that's what the UFC is doing on purpose, but at least it's something you can tell yourself to feel a little bit better if the fight card isn't super stacked. That being said, the King of Rio, Jose Aldo, is coming back out of retirement to fight. You see his little picture here with the mustache next to Islam Makhachev, so that's very exciting. Yeah, pretty cool announcement. I'm happy to have him back. I'm not mad. I don't care. Like, again, sometimes people say, oh, that cheapens the retirement if you come back. But at the same time, then you get to see him fight again. If he's still got it, and that's great. So I'm not mad at legends coming back out of retirement, especially in the fight game. It's not like you're retiring from some salaried contract for the NFL or something like that, which even in that situation, if you want to come back, fuck it. And things happen, taking one-off fights here and there, coming back to be the king of Rio again as he is in Brazil. I don't mind it at all. Nate Diaz versus, Jorge Masvidal in boxing happening soon. Both probably washed fighters in general, so I'll give the edge to Masvidal because he's just, as long as he's got the cardio to match Nate for that fight, he's got more power and more damaging ability. But who knows and who cares? And then the last kind of thing that happened over the weekend, Tom Aspinall ran into Jon Jones. They had a little bit of a, I don't even know. I also realized I wasn't sharing my screen there with whatever was happening, so who cares? Anyway. Oh man, well I'm a little bit tired, so I think I'm gonna end the episode there. Might touch back on some of these things later in the week. Might show a little bit more about the Tom Aspinall situation. As I was kind of saying, he ran to Jon Jones, kind of just tried to do a little photo op thing. It's a cool video, kind of, if you go out and find it. But basically, John seemed like he was being a little bit smug and kind of like, oh hey, what's up? You've been talking shit, recently. And he's sizing him up a little bit. Tom looks a lot bigger than John, but John still's got those lanky arms, and he's got the skill sets. And anyone who says that John looked scared, I mean, he did not look scared. He looked like he was like maniacal and devious and like, I want to kill this guy and fuck you. And Tom seemed like his energy was a little bit off, from how John was responding to him. So I love both fighters. Not really mad about either way. I don't think anyone's scared of anybody. Would love to see that fight one day, but just another moment in MMA. Thanks for tuning in. If you've been with me this long in this episode, really appreciate it. Stay tuned later in the week for some more kind of headline news, some more fight breakdowns, looking ahead at the next fights coming later in the week, and anything else that happens in MMA that makes me want to do a video. So appreciate you all for tuning in. Again, this is MMA Full Throttle with Aristotle. Please follow Black Gritty, and catch us for Gritty Nights on Tuesdays at 9 p.m. on our live stream. And follow Harry Tags as well on social media. Appreciate you all. Until next time, we'll catch you later.